BionicDance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
BionicDance just did a video not too long ago challenging Christians, saying, can you admit that what you believe as a Christian sounds stupid, foolish, weird, bizarre, it doesn't make any sense, it sounds like something from a fiction movie and all this, right?
That was indeed my challenge, but while the letter has indeed been satisfied, it would seem that the spirit, so to speak, has been entirely missed. I can't say I'm honestly surprised, but, well, let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. About 3 weeks ago, has it really been that long? I made a video as a challenge to Christians, asking them to try to understand what it's like to be an atheist, hearing people preaching at us, reading the contents of the Bible, and why it sounds like superstitious nonsense to someone who doesn't already believe it. I was hoping for more of a response than I got, but at least one guy did respond, and in typical Christian fashion, he took the opportunity not to try to understand, but to preach. His nearly 13-minute-long reply is mostly trying to justify the silliness in the Bible, telling anecdotes about converting an atheist and not really answering the challenge as intended, plus a sprinkling of Pascal's wager. And that's everything you need to know about this video. The rest will mostly just be me facepalming and fast-forwarding through the preachy bits. Stick around if you like, but there really won't be any surprises.
And it was interesting watching her video because it made me really think as a Christian, how do we come across to non-Christians?
At this point, I was hopeful. Maybe he really was going to do a little self-examination here. We all need it from time to time. Some of us more than others. But I was really hoping he was about to take up the challenge properly. Silly me.
When we say we believe in Jesus and the Bible, that there's a creator God, and we
even share things like, we believe that evolution isn't true. We believe that, some 5,000-6,000 years ago, that there was actually a worldwide flood.
And Christians, we sound weird when it comes to non-Christians, unbelievers, atheists, whoever out there, especially those who just don't want to believe, right?
Those who don't want to believe? Okay, that. Right there. That's something you people need to work on. The challenge wasn't even really about this. It was mostly about the supernatural claims made by the Bible. But I would be hard-pressed to find an atheist who hasn't been accused of not wanting to believe, or of hardening our hearts, or some other extraordinarily insulting nonsense like this, assuming that it's our fault for not believing your claims, rather than us having actually honestly examined your claims and found them faulty, where the Bible is treated as axiomatically true, and so it's somehow a feeling of ours for not being on board. I'm not going to claim that saying this will win you actual enemies, but it certainly won't win you any allies either. When you say things like this, you're insulting your audience. Even if you think it's true, this is a rotten way to make a sales pitch to people who aren't already on your side. Not to say my own hands are entirely clean. In moments of frustration, I've been known to ask other people, or even entirely empty rooms, how theists can believe such stupid things. But I've found that they'll at least consider my points better if I'm not saying it right to their faces.
There's different categories of atheists out there. Obviously, if you're an atheist watching this, I'm sure you would agree with that. There's not all atheists are the same. Some atheists are more on the side of the agnostic side, where they want to believe in something, they're just not sure what it is.
This is another assumption I run into a lot, that everybody has a God-shaped hole in their life that needs to be filled with something. Agnosticism, even in the old antiquated definition of the word, never implied wanting to believe. It just meant that the answer was unknown or unknowable. And most agnostics were probably also apistemists, people who wouldn't use faith to come to conclusions, even though the word for that wouldn't be invented until 2010. You're welcome.
And then there's the other atheist who says, you know what, Years ago, I remember talking to one of my best friend's dads, and he was a totally hardcore atheist, wanted nothing to do with Christianity or Jesus, whatever else. So maybe I'm wrong, but you know what? Maybe I'm not. So BionicDance asked this question and basically said, hey, Christians, why don't you just admit what you believe sounds foolish? It sounds weird.
That's not quite what I was asking for. Indeed, that sounds far more mean-spirited than I'd ever intended. Because what I'd actually asked is whether you can understand why other people might think it's weird, specifically the magical parts, the supernatural parts. Religions make claims about things happening that are only possible in non-religious stories when done by witches, wizards, genies, and fairies and such like. The challenge is about whether you can understand why someone who isn't religious might make that comparison between scriptures and fairy tales. Can you understand, both intellectually and viscerally, why that comparison seems reasonable to a person who is not invested in either one of them being true or false?
Christians believe in things that are weird. The Bible talks about a lot of things that are strange. I mean, I will openly admit that, especially the past and what's yet to come in the future. I mean, the future must sound really weird to non-Christians. I mean, it talks about Jesus coming back, his second return. He's going to judge the world. He's going to judge a false prophet. There's going to be an antichrist down the world. There's going to be like a worldwide one government. There's going to be like many wars and earthquakes and all these things really increasing around the world. World domination, and it could be even some stuff that a lot of Christians even think could be tied into Islam and whatever else. And that sounds really bizarre, but that's what Christians believe, and that's actually in the Bible. And there's actually things in the Bible that talk about these things that seem to be indicating these things to be true.
To quote Ghostbusters, every ancient religion has its own myth about the end of the world. And it seems like for every natural disaster, there is a priest and his followers, usually outside the mainstream, but not always, who insist that this time it really is the rapture, so they sell off all their possessions and prep for the world ending, which, of course, it doesn't. And you'll get those preachers who insist that a cornfield in Iowa being victim of a tornado is God's wrath because gays in New York City aren't being kept in their place. A storm that probably would have happened anyway, gays or no gays. Over and over and over we hear these things, and after a while you have to start to wonder if these people are on the level. Everything we've ever been told will happen by the will of God is something that could have happened without him, and everything we're told couldn't have happened without the will of God is so far back in history that the only parts we can verify are what could have happened without a God. After a while, it starts to look more and more like humans made up a bunch of stories about gods, rather than any actually being there. So again, back to the challenge. After so many claims that don't come true, or don't need a god to come true, can you understand why Christianity might have lost a bit of credibility with non-believers?
Christians believe in this Jesus guy that lived some 2,000 years ago in a little place called Israel. But for an atheist, you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I get it, because the Bible even says that the gospel is foolishness to people like yourself, those who want to reject it, and it even says that those who are perishing.
And this is just more of the same. Do you truly not understand how insulting it is to be told that I don't believe because I want to reject the Bible? When you treat the Bible as axiomatically true and those who don't accept that are just naysaying sticks in the mud, you sound like an arrogant jerk looking down your nose at people. As I said, this may not be making you actual enemies, but it's not making you any friends either. Consider your audience. Most outspoken atheists see the Bible as an unproved claim, and you can't use a claim to prove itself. Telling us that the Bible claims to know we'll think it's a bit dodgy only says that the authors knew they were talking shite, and people would see right through them, so they built in an escape hatch. Those who reject its goofy claims are all either foolish, stubborn, or evil because the Bible is true, because the Bible is true, because it and the God it says are real both say so. This may sound great to other Christians, but it makes a lot of atheists kind of want to punch you. This is why I created the challenge, to see whether you can understand why your message may not be landing the way you think it ought.
So, for a non-Christian, this doesn't make any sense. It sounds bizarre and weird. And so, as a Christian, I understand where you're coming from, because there are things, even as I read the Bible, I go, wow, that's in the Bible? That's really interesting. And what I like about the Bible, whether you agree with this or not, there's things that are in there that you go, why didn't they write that out of there? What were they thinking? They were on some crack or something, right? Because why would you put that in there about, people getting killed or murder, the things of the Old Testament with rape and other things, and you go, what? But what's interesting is because these were things that really happened.
But that's not the point. Rape and murder may not be the best topics in the world, though I suppose in some of the darker parts of the internet you might find people writing some pretty twisted fetish fantasy who disagree. But we at least know that such things can happen. So if someone were to write a story about them, fiction or biographical, the audience can have at least a little bit of willing suspension of disbelief. But when people start talking about angels and demons with flaming swords and guys coming back to life and seas being parted and such, how much of that do you see happening in real life with your own eyes? How much did we catch on camera before special effects started looking realistic? Right, none. That's the sticking point. For every alleged historical claim made by the Bible, we can only verify the parts that wouldn't need magic to have happened. And the better we get at biology and physics and archaeology, the more we realize just how much the supernatural is not required to explain anything. So given how not magical the world seems to be, and that we never see magic in day-to-day life, and yet to believe the Bible we absolutely must believe in the supernatural, can you begin to understand why we might not be convinced by your book?
So, as a Christian, yes, me believing in Jesus sounds really bizarre to you, but I have some good reasons as well. And the Bible talks about that many will reject and mock. But for those who are honest and open seekers, I want to encourage you today. I don't know where you're at. Maybe you've been hurt by the church. Maybe you're part of church. Maybe you've never been a part of church. I don't know. But I want to encourage you. There are good resources out there today.
See? Again, you couldn't step outside of yourself enough to not preach. The whole idea of the challenge was to see whether you could understand why preaching and quoting the Bible at some people just falls flat for them. And it doesn't look as if you've even given it an honest try. The point of the challenge is not to convince other people you have a point. You're supposed to try to understand why they aren't convinced by your point. If you're preaching, then you've only been using the time they've been talking to figure out what you're going to say next, which means you're not taking up the challenge at all. Bottom line is that there is a disconnect. You read it here, but you never see it out there in the real world. And for some people, the real world supersedes this book or any other. No amount of preaching or reading will change that. You've got to give us a way to find what's in here out there, to find it without this book, to show that the book describes rather than proclaims, or what's out there wins. And you've got to be able to show that you understand this and the reasons for it, or you've failed the challenge.
Now here's the bottom line. If this is all a farce, and this makes, and it's all a bunch of bunk, okay, then guess what? We just go to the dirt and that's it, right?
Christians tossing about Pascal's wager always assume theirs is the only God to be afraid of, kind of like how people who believe in reincarnation always seem to think that their next life will be on this planet. Echo chamber meet bubble. Bubble meet echo chamber.
We all live every day by faith, whether you acknowledge that or not. We all live our lives by faith.
If you're telling people what they think, if you claim to know better than someone else how their own mind works, you're not just failing the challenge, you're doing the exact opposite of what was proposed. And, much like with every other instance thus far, doing so is more likely to win you enemies than friends.
So, as I finish up today, BionicDance, I hope that you do get to watch this.
I almost didn't even notice it. YouTube is not great about sending me notifications about comments on my videos. It gets frustrating sometimes.
And I openly admit, as a Christian, the Christian gospel, the Christian faith does sound weird.
But it's not enough to just say you know it's weird. To meet the challenge, it's necessary to know how it's weird, to recognize that to be weird is to be outside the norm, and to understand why Christianity is too weird for some people's willing suspension of disbelief. I suppose it's possible that this challenge is too challenging, that for a Christian to meet it, they'd have to ultimately give up Christianity. Or maybe not. But what I know is that this is not what I was looking for. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. It was mostly about the supernatural. I mean, they're superficial, but supernatural. Where the Bible is treated as axiomatically true, and so it's somehow a failing on rather than having examining thing. Oh, I'm never gonna get this in one take. lot. That everybody has a God-shaped hole in their life that needs to be filled. Blech. This is another assumption I run into. The new, Hungarian god of gambling. Run into. That one. If you don't like what I'm saying, there's a good chance you're the reason I'm saying it.